All right, welcome back to our final section discussing the implications of meiosis. So we're going to move into concept 13.4, genetic variation produced in sexual life cycles contributes to evolution. So um, let's keep in mind here that all of the differences within a particular gene that we see in a population of organisms. So let's make it simple and let's just talk about people. So all the variations that we see in people are ultimately due to mutations, right? So we have DNA being replicated. It is replicated imperfectly, and that imperfect replication can lead to changes in sequences of amino acids and proteins that can alter um, what that protein is supposed to do. We could also have a mutation that alters how much of that protein we are supposed to make. Now, all in all, these mutations are typically bad, right? When we change the function of something, it's usually not for the better, but occasionally it does. If we also do have mutations occur within a gene that has already been duplicated, there is much more tolerance for that mutation to occur. So if we have a single copy of gene 1 and we get a mutation and it changes its function, that's bad. But if we take gene 1 and make two separate copies of it within the genome, keep the original gene 1 intact, and then mutate gene 1 or the second copy of gene 1, then that is more tolerated. And there are mechanisms by which we can replicate particular genes, right? It's not something that's done intentionally by us, but it's something that happens. So when it does, and we get mutations occurring in those, it tends to be more tolerated, and over time, that protein can develop a new function. That new function might give an organism an advantage, all right? So whenever we have mutated versions of different genes, we call those alleles. And this could be as simple as a gene that is responsible for expressing dark pigmentation in hair. So instead of having black hair, we have various variations of red or blonde hair, right? So there can be something very simple that happens that can change something very visibly. Now, I think we would all agree that the color of our hair has very little to do with our individual survival, right? Other times, these mutations can have a significant difference. Now, once we get a bunch of these mutations existing within populations, recognize that all this reshuffling that occurs during sexual reproduction produces a lot of variations based upon those few individual mutations. Now, recognize that the behavior of chromosomes during meiosis and during fertilization is responsible for most of this variation. So the original mutations uh, are responsible for the actual variation to exist, but how we get that gene mutated in combination with, say, a different gene that is mutated, it all comes down to three basic mechanisms. So we have the independent assortment of chromosomes, we have this crossing over effect, and we also have random fertilization. So let's talk about each one of these individually. So, homologous pairs of chromosomes orientate randomly at metaphase 1 of meiosis. So, when we separate genes or separate the chromosomes, here we have two copies of chromosome 1 from dad, two copies of chromosome 1 from mom, two copies of chromosome 2 from dad, two copies of chromosome 2 from 1. We could simply divide those evenly and have all chromosomes 1 and 2 from dad over here, and all chromosomes from mom over here, which would lead us to individual cells that this is all chromosome 1 and 2 from dad, chromosome 1 and 2 from dad, chromosome 1 and 2 from mom, chromosome 1 and 2 from mom, right? But this is only one possibility. If we flip-flop how these two line up on the axis, and that is something that does happen completely randomly, we could line up this way. And if we line up this way, then this original split leads to a cell that only has chromosome 1 from dad and only has chromosome 2 from mom. This would lead to this possible combination or to this possible combination. Now, remember that we are not even talking about the effects of crossing over yet. This is simply due to the independent assortment, the fact that how these chromosome 2s line up, which direction they're facing, can result in two very different scenarios, right? So if we take all of these possible combinations and then we can think about this in terms of probability. So the actual, so we have two overall possibilities based upon one chromosome. So then we take, for humans, an entire set of chromosomes, so 23 sets. This leads to a total possible combination of 2 to the 23rd power, right? So already, just with this one mechanism, we have a lot of variation. Now, if we add into that the effect of crossing over, we are going to add into that. So remember that during crossing over, we take non-sister chromatids, we form them together in this chiasma. We get crossing over occurring, which will produce hybrid forms of some of our chromosomes. So here's chromosome 1 from dad, here's chromosome 2 that has some of dad and a little bit of mom at the ends. Here we have all of chromosome 1 from mom and chromosome 1 from mom with a little bit of dad at both ends, right? So now we have these added sets of rearrangements, right? So think about that in combination with this is already an astounding number of possibilities. Now, let's add into that one more factor and recognize that we are not reproducing with ourselves, we are reproducing with a partner, which are contributing their own random set, right? So in random fertilization, we are going to have a particular egg, which might have a random set of chromosomes, and then we are going to have one of any number of different sperms with all individual randomized versions of the chromosomes. So if we take those possible recombinations and look at how this all plays out, we can see that there are about 70 trillion different combinations that can occur between two specific individuals, right? And then crossing over only adds into that, right? So we have 2 to the 23rd power from just independent assortment. We do that by the fact that we have two individuals which that process is happening independently in. We then take that, so each zygote is definitely going to have a unique genetic identity, right? So let's put this in relation to evolution. So natural selection results in the accumulation of genetic variations that are favored by the environment. So if you have good genes that fit the environment, you live. If you don't, you die, right? So now we have an accumulation of those good genetic variants. We then put that into sexual reproduction, where we take all of those things that are still good, re-scramble them, and create variety, which may allow us to move into maybe a new area or a new environment. Or if the environment suddenly changes, a small percentage of our population may be well adapted to that and may be able to survive very well. The rest of us, well, not so good. But those will survive. Those genetic variations will then be accumulated and be consequently favored by the environment. So, this is a major part of keeping diversity up, which gives us evolutionary advantage over the long term. This evolutionary advantage isn't for an individual, but for the species as a whole, it is very important. Consequently, there are very few animals that reproduce asexually. Right? They do exist, but they are quite rare. This is not as true when you get down to the prokaryotic level. Prokaryotes are almost exclusively asexual in nature. However, all of these organisms that do reproduce asexually have adapted specific mechanisms for what we call horizontal gene transfer. This is when one bacteria can take up the genes from a completely unrelated bacteria that has died and utilize those genes, right? Or it doesn't, sometimes they have mechanisms where they can actively share those genes among each other. This is actually what is leading to the problem of antibiotic resistance. There are actually only a few bacteria that were originally out there that had antibiotic resistance, but because we've now put evolutionary pressure on them, in which case only ones that gain new genes will survive, those antibiotic resistance genes get transferred from different species of bacteria to other species of bacteria and grow in quantity. So they have specific mechanisms to try and account for the fact that they don't have sexual reproduction. So again, genetic variation produced in sexual life cycles contributes to evolution. So first of all, we have independent assortment, which has 2 to the 23rd power of different combinations coming out. We also have this idea of crossing over, in which case we have not only chromosome from dad, chromosome from mom, but hybrids of mom and dad in various combinations. We add into this the fact that there's random fertilization and there is a huge amount of genetic variability possible. And hopefully will give our offspring a better opportunity to survive their environment.